Hello and welcome. You are watching QTV and you are watching the Week in Review. It's our weekly trawl through 10 of the big stories from the week, and we go through them in some detail. And when I say we, I have my colleague and friend Mr. Momodun Boj to go through them with me. As ever, Mr. Boj, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Ade.
And just to say, for those who are new to this, we play a clip from one of the 10 stories that I mentioned, and then we'll go through it in some details. And I said there are 10, 5 in the first half and 5 in the second half. We look at unbelievable debt owed by government agencies. We look at National Assembly having to be adjourned because a minister didn't turn up. And some odd ones, second-hand underwear. All will be revealed. So let's get kicking, shall we? First one, it was revealed on Friday that state-owned enterprises and the government owe rather a lot to the Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation. How much? I won't spoil it. Have a look.
This amount owed by SOEs is 1,418,311,000. Owed by government to Social Security is 421,577,000.
Though the state-owned enterprises have been paying their debts according to the payment plan, there remains a significant outstanding balance. Only 2 out of the 7 SOEs have settled all their debts.
Payment plan, and I said we do put a lot of pressure on them. When they are going to settle it, we don't know. But the pressure from the ministry is, we've been very consistent. We write to them, we make sure when we go to their board meetings, we do remind them that Social Security is pensioners' funds. So we cannot afford not to be paid.
There we heard the Finance Minister. Mr. Mboj, this is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you today. How did we get to this stage? You know, I say get to this stage where, you know, government and state-owned enterprises between them owe $1.8 billion to the fund, which is essentially the pension fund, you know, the country's pension fund. And I wanted that bit to go on because I wanted to hear the minister talk about the rather ineffective way that they've gone. We've written to them, we've had meetings with them, and we're putting pressure on them. I mean, come on. They need to do more than that. This is serious business.
Oh, absolutely, and it's all obviously accumulated over a long period. But we knew that with state-owned enterprises, they are not really profitable as they work, as things are right now. In fact, according to a World Bank report, 2020, I think it was published. 6%? It takes up 6% of our GDP in 2019. So instead of these state enterprises, most of them making profits, rather government is spending money.
Yes, that's kind of propping them up, you might even say.
Propping them up. So this is it. Yes. And then hearing the minister saying, well, he doesn't know when. They
don't know when. And he went on to say, for those who didn't see the full report, only 2 that actually settled their debts, and then the others, they sort of, it's like, you know, you go and buy something from a shop and you arrange a debt repayment plan, and it didn't seem as if you say it's a debt repayment plan, that means you've given them a time limit by which they should pay, and yet from what we heard there, that's not the case. They're dragging their feet, they're not doing it, and you know, they're pushing them, they're having meetings with them, but they're just not doing it. And this, as I said, in terms of the pension fund, this is very, very serious.
And this is what we mean by, being a good leader, the implementation. They had set the payment plan, which means that at a certain period, you must put in this amount of money. All of that was set, then we enforce it. So when you come back and tell me, I do not know, then was there a plan?
Was there a plan? Because normally, when you have that kind of payment plan, it happens in other situations. You agree between yourself and the entity, whether it's the government department or it's a state-owned enterprise, you agree with them that, oh, this is a payment plan we're working out for you because this is what we think you can manage to pay. So get on with paying it. And it's not being paid.
No, absolutely. So whatever plans they might have had,
Yeah.
now it seems gone to the wind. They do not know. So they just, I don't know, indulging them. I do not even know what to call it. So now it depends how long it will take, how these people would pay, when they would pay. Perhaps it's up to these to the institutions to decide that. But this is what they say. Too much of discretionary power. That seems too discretionary there. I
Sure.
do not know. You cannot
That's
run
right.
that.
Yeah.
We know that some of the preconditions where some corruption can happen is where you have this discretionary power,
Sure.
as it were, in public officials, and then the other bit is when they want to use it for economic rent,
This is
and
it.
there is no deterrence, as it
Exactly.
were. You
Yes.
have these chunks. So discretionary power, I'm not so sure about that. I do not know. No, you have a plan, you have to stick to it.
Sure, sure. And as I said, and as we keep saying, this is quite serious because it's regarding, the kind of state pension fund. And really for it to be owed that much by state-owned enterprises is fairly shocking, well, in fact, very shocking. So, Mr. Mboj, I think we have to wait and see, what comes of this one, but it's definitely one that we will be following again. But thanks for that. And now on to our second story. And again, this is to do with the National Assembly. There were some bills before Parliament, but not just any bills. These were bills relating to justice sector. What happened? Well, again, I won't spoil the fun for you. Have a look.
On Tuesday, National Assembly convenes for what would have been a busy session with bills for which the minister is responsible for consideration. However, there is no sign of the minister, and after a long wait, the Speaker, Mariam Jack Denton, enters the chamber to announce to the Assembly what she calls the regrettable absence of the Justice Minister for the business of this session.
As presiding officer, I am very concerned that Parliament will not be able to proceed with due business today due to the unavailability of the Honorable Attorney General without any prior formal communication to the Office of the Speaker or the Clerk.
Madam Speaker, Mariam Jack Denton, using parliamentary language, concern, regrettable, but the message was clear. She went on to say in the longer piece that she was disappointed that the minister had not had the courtesy to formally inform. I mean, they could have swept this under the carpet and just said the minister's not here, but she wanted it plain because what was before them were 3, possibly 4 bills that related to the Justice Ministry that demanded the Justice Minister not being there, and yet Mr. Mboj, we were told he wasn't there and he might face contempt.
Absolutely. So what I thought about, you said there,
Charge.
that the speaker there with her diplomatic language,
Yes,
parliamentary language there,
Yes, yes,
but the action. So I was
Yes.
thinking about what about the action?
yes.
So this is really very curious to me because they said they waited and waited.
That's right.
So giving the impression that everything had been agreed,
Been set up,
the
yes.
appointment
Yes.
and everything agreed, and then the Justice Minister didn't show up. Now I'm really curious to know, were things really arranged and everything new, as it were, what was decided? Was it as simple as that?
Yes.
Because it makes me want to question again whether that was actually properly done.
Because
It was said that it was done,
sure.
but did it actually happen? I would love to know. I mean, so for now, one only suspends judgment, but we move on and I look at it in a wider frame. So here you were disappointed, but then there was the press there. So your first reactions, you could see the frustration, you could
Yes.
sense it everywhere.
Yes.
But maybe that shouldn't have shown.
Yes, yes.
I do not know the antecedents. I mean, was the
Sure.
Justice Minister in the habit of not coming? As far as I'm aware, we have had a few reports where the Justice Minister appeared before the National Assembly.
Yeah, indeed, yes.
And
yes.
so far as I'm aware, I haven't heard a situation where a minister had been called and he or she didn't appear.
Sure, sure.
So I think it seems things are going on well.
Yes.
Before I come out with this reaction, I'm frustrated.
yes.
Maybe I should have said the minister should have been here Not here. We'll find out, and then perhaps talk later.
Yes,
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
I think it would have come out in the debate because some of the National Assembly members who got to their feet to speak were quite pointed, saying that the minister has known for quite a while that this was going to happen, and that it would have taken a phone call or an email to say I'm not going to be there, and they felt it was a discourtesy. For that not to happen. They were quite pointed in their language, and the speaker didn't stop them. In fact, she was using similar language, which you said is possibly bordered on being intemperate. But nonetheless, I think what we heard from the National Assembly members and from the Speaker, Madam Speaker, was that actually everything was set, and that all it would have taken for people not to kind of waste their time. They waited and waited thinking, oh, well, maybe he's late, maybe he's caught in traffic, that sort of thing, until they realized that actually it was none of those things. He simply wasn't coming. And they felt that was because he has a whole office that he runs. Somebody from that office, his deputy, could have appeared there and said, Madam Speaker, the minister is not able to attend, etc., etc. That would have been enough, I think. But they felt it was discourteous, which is why some of them are pushing that if it is found, nothing's been sort of investigated and proven yet, if it is found that this was a deliberate sort of non-communication, that the minister must face contempt. But then what does contempt mean? I did try and look it up to see what the sanctions were, but I couldn't find anything. I have to say, maybe I didn't read enough of the literature, but I couldn't find what the sanctions are for that sort of contempt.
Yes, that's it. So, but you see, when you put it that way, you know, the facts seemingly known, absolutely. Sure. But for me, when I listened, they were all making empirical statements, sure. But I really need to hear from the minister.
I was going to say, it's what you and I tell our journalists when we send them out. That's exactly that, yes, you've heard a very persuasive story, absolutely, but you haven't heard the other side.
But I haven't heard the other side.
Sure.
So it sort of makes it difficult. But it will be quite interesting for us to know what's going on. So that was why I thought that the reaction, the contempt bit, because I would like to think that they reserve contempt for really serious stuff.
I mean, the person who proposed it did say that if it is investigated and found that this is what happened, then they can bring contempt. They weren't saying bring contempt anyway, contempt charge against the minister. He's very cagey in how he phrased it. He said if it is proven that this is what happened, then the minister will be subject to a charge of contempt.
That's it, and they've also asked for what? A letter of apology.
Indeed.
That's it. So what happens if it doesn't? Does the contempt charge depend on that? For instance,
yes,
when the apology, what does it do? Sure. So I'm not sure if this should have been the first course of reaction. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not
I think
sure.
part of it was playing to the gallery, because there was media were there. And the media were like, what, the minister didn't turn up? And they started sort of whispering amongst themselves because they were all waiting, because, as I said, there were 3 bills at least that were all to do with the Justice Ministry. And it's meant that those are now hampered because they don't know when next they can bring those bills to be in front of the Assembly and for the Justice Minister to then answer questions about them.
Oh, absolutely. And the time they've got.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
Very, very short. The next, it will
and I think that's why the frustration was there. That's why
the frustration was there. Sure. They wanted to clear, I think, these bills in time so they will leave and the like. And maybe it's important that they do so right now. Yeah, they have no idea what kind of National Assembly will have next time round.
Exactly.
that sort of thing. So, of course, one understands the frustration. But that's the burden of leadership.
Well,
sometimes there are certain things you don't let it show. You go into it. I'm not sure what was his relationship with the National Assembly like. Yes. Maybe that played on them a bit. But from the reports that I had seen, and we've seen the minister appear before the National Assembly a few occasions, sure. We've seen in the past. Sure. And it seemed that there was that relationship. We didn't think that there was this tension between ministers and the National Assembly. Sure. Should this happen, let's hold our tongue and we listen and stop.
I think hold our tongue.
Yeah, if the minister is at fault,
advice.
we hope that the president will do something about it.
Sure.
This is exactly how we put it. If the minister is at fault,
Sure.
maybe the president should do something about it. We must have respect for the National Assembly.
Yeah, let's hope that is what happens. On to our third story. Now, for those who use the ferry service regularly, they were out of service recently, but for very good reason. And not only have they been fixed, but there's also some extra good news. Have a look.
We have some new services that we also want to inform the public about. One of these is the Gambia Ferries app. This app contains a lot of features. We have the ferries tariff inbuilt in the app. The ferry schedule is also in the app. And then there's a map where you can track the ferry real time. Also, all announcements that we have will also be uploaded in this app. Today we can say that the app is available publicly on the Google Play, and it can be downloaded. It can be downloaded by the general public. Apart from that, the other service we want to introduce is the e-ticketing system, but that will be launched in March 2022.
There we heard the head of the ferry service there. I think it's the general manager. For me, Mr. Mboj, I thought some very good announcements there, but I was quite surprised in the office. You know, they talked about the ferries app where you can view stuff in real time. As you know, as the ferry is moving, you can see how close or how far it is from you. They talked about the tariff being there, and as I was getting excited, some of my colleagues were like, "Well, many of the people using it can't read," and I was kind of deflated. But nonetheless, it means we need to up our literacy rate. But surely these are good things, these various apps.
Absolutely, on the face of it,
Yeah.
anything that seemed to be able to contribute, as it were, to the improvement of things in one way or another, it's always a good thing. But we all know that how much does it contribute?
No.
They are not all of equal weight, all
No,
these
true.
inputs, as it were. So fine, we take it for what it is, but we know that to have a more efficient service, it goes beyond that.
Of
This
course,
is just
of course.
an added on kind of a bonus kind of thing.
Yeah.
The heart of the matter lies elsewhere.
Of course. I mean, they've replaced engines in some of them, so they've
Protecting
given them.
effort, yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they've given them new engines. I think you had 3 engines, and they've all been replaced. The others have been refurbished. They've been repainted, and they look quite nice for the moment. Let's hope the upkeep is. But the app that I particularly like is the one where in real time you can see how the ferry is. Because back in London, where I was, I could sit in my house and I knew exactly where the bus was. So I wasn't standing at the bus stop for half an hour, as used to be the case. I could leave my house because the bus stop was only 2 minutes away. I could leave it when the bus was maybe 4 minutes away, and then bang on time, it would be there. And it never failed. You could actually track it on a map, see it as it was coming towards the bus stop. And similar is what is being proposed here. So,
exactly.
on the face of it.
So for those who have the resource, the smartphone, and then I can use it.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Sure. I guess what
those
will
who
happen,
can't,
they'll get other people to use,
perhaps
show them
get
how.
other people to use it.
Sure.
And you will even have the more daring ones, the ones who love challenges. You wouldn't be surprised that you'll see a middle-aged woman here and there who would actually call, a nephew, a niece, whatever, teach me how to do it. You do have these characters. It just depends on people's characters. So you can have all sorts, really.
Good. Yeah, well, I think generally a good thing. Yeah, thank you for that. Now, the next one, you might be surprised that it is taken up till now for the Gambia to have a prohibition of torture bill. I'm not making this up. It's only going through the parliament now. Have a look.
Honorable Speaker, it is important that we see this act or this bill, which will ultimately become an act, as the first basis of ensuring that we domesticate not only international law, but that we put into operation, in practice, the provision that seeks to protect our fundamental rights and freedom.
There we heard the bill being debated or spoken of in the National Assembly, Prohibition of Torture Bill, Mr. Mboj, and I learned a new word this week. I heard several of them say it was to illegalize. I'd never heard the word before. I confess, I had always just used make illegal. But they said it is to illegalize.
Absolutely,
which is quite clever. But why only now?
And you know, when I saw this, I said, oops, boy, if only we had this act, then all of that torture and the rest of it wouldn't have taken place.
In our dreams.
In our dreams. See, that irony, because for me, it's just an irony.
Yeah.
Boy. Do we really? I mean, it tells you what you have in your books and what you do.
Well, that's the point I was coming to, because we talk all the time about the fact that we have all these laws anyway that aren't adhered to. What makes anybody think they're going to adhere to this one?
Absolutely, that sort of thing. And look at it. So if this is the first time, really, then through our Joveris period, we never had it.
Yeah.
But look at the experience.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then when the second one came, they didn't care about the laws that were in there. You know, this may not be there, but in other provisions we are protected.
Exactly, and yet rode roughshod over them.
Yeah,
so now
roughshod over them. So absolutely, these things are as good as we are or how we implement them.
Indeed, yes,
you know, by themselves.
Sure.
They're inert.
Indeed, yeah.
So we give them life.
Yeah.
You know,
so all this talk about, thing. You know, it's kind of, we're finally now going to be kind of living up to international standards of prohibition of torture. I'm not convinced. It's what we do rather than what we say.
Yeah, this is just having the legal framework.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a good thing to have the legal framework, but what makes it good? The goodness really is in the application.
Absolutely.
Without the application, it's just sitting there.
Just words on paper.
It's just words on paper.
Yeah, there you are. So honestly, we need to get away from that, because there's far too much of that, not just here, but in many African countries. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our fifth story. There have been lots and lots of sessions recently, you know, seminars, conferences and so on, of journalists training on conflict-sensitive journalism. Recently, it was the turn of 50 journalists, including some of our own. Have a look.
Expose hate speech for what it is, but you should not amplify its message. And you must walk the fine line between countering hate speech and promoting the freedom of speech, which is a fundamental human right.
Landry Aragonde, the director of International Press Center, said the media can play a significant role in de-escalating and managing conflict situations and countering hate speech.
Our colleague Omar P. Jallow there talking about the media's role, Mr. Mboj. They talked about being sensitive and countering hate speech, and also, as they said, conflict sensitive. And again, in the office, we had a discussion around what has happened in Casamance and how that was reported. And I have gone on record with my views, but Mr. Mboj, this really is a word that everybody else loves to use, timely. In the sense that that was, for me, a kind of perfect case scenario of how not to report on a kind of conflict situation. But so training, is it going to help, or is it just another 3-day thing that people attend and then they don't put into practice?
Yes, here the focus really was on the election, the upcoming election, wasn't it?
That's right.
So and then this
thing
happened. So in this instance, really timely, it's really appropriate. How much difference would it make? At least it's making us thinking about situations in a new way. I mean, it sort of problematizes, it's sort of making us reflect on how we are doing things.
Yes,
maybe that will have an impact.
That's right.
You know, an influence on perhaps next time how we do it. This time we've talked about it.
Sure.
So I think that there's something positive out of that. Even if you have 1 or 2 journalists being changed from that, I think I'm cool with that.
Sure,
this is the
sure.
nature of change. It is slow.
That's right.
We're certainly talking about it.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing to disseminate the,
Sure.
the ideas out there.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I didn't want to say, because I've been critical of 4 or 5 journalists, there were 50 on this course, and who knows, the other 45 might have taken on board what is said. But as you said, this is mainly to do with our elections, but this thing actually happened, and it kind of gave them a practical example of the do's and the don'ts of it.
That's it. Maybe what I'm scared of, just as we've had an example there in the Casamas area, how the reporters were reporting it.
Yeah, yes.
You see, here when we talked to the president of the Gambia Press Union,
Yeah.
he was talking about the diversity of views and the like. Which I say, I am okay with that. There must be that diversity. But again, there's something else I must do as a journalist, as a reporter. The objectivity. You see, objectivity to me means that to give them a realistic picture of facts that are out of myself. For instance, we had the head of MFDC, when he said that his movement, they've never been into illegal logging, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. Yes, I will say that, but again, according to many reports,
This is it.
I will bring that and say,
Yes.
according to many reports, they have been involved in this,
This is
they have
it.
been involved in that. So that objectivity, that taking of facts outside of the subjective, that objective,
quite.
subjective.
Sure.
So there must be judgment in the end.
Sure. And I think there must be judgment in the end.
Otherwise, I'm not doing journalism.
This is it.
No,
It's
I'm
just
not doing
straight
journalism.
reportage.
Being a stenographer.
Yeah,
I
quite.
tell them, I'm not a stenographer,
Quite.
I'm a journalist.
Quite.
There's a
And
difference.
there's a difference.
So a lot of people, when they go out there, they become stenographers.
Sure. And so journalists don't become stenographers. Be journalists, be objective, ask difficult questions, and just have your objectivity hat on. Thank you for that, Mr. Burge. And at this point, we will take a commercial break. And when we come back, 5 more stories. So don't go away. Join us after this break.
I am the light goddess. Everything I touch turns into light. I am the light at the end of the tunnel, and my technology is the answer. I am the happiness in your life. I keep you connected, and I am Q-Power. I am Q-Cell. I am Sunibus. We innovate, others follow. Call 111 for more information.
Hello and welcome back. You are watching QTV and you are watching the Week in Review. If you just joined us, you've missed 5 stories, but as I always say at this point, and I'm not lying, 5 cracking stories still to go. And as ever, I have my colleague and friend, Mr. Mboj, here with me. Mr. Mboj, thanks again. And now some quite different stories coming up, although the next one is one that we hear about all too often. We hear people talk about water problems, and yet there's water all around us and there's ways of harvesting water, and yet we hear nothing but problems on a daily basis, including this one. Have a look.
At Jabang substation, both transformers are not working and need maintenance or replacement. The NAWEC PRO, Pierre Silva, explains.
During the peak period, we don't have that much needed capacity to be able to put everybody on board. And we have to use a method of knocking out certain places for a certain period, let's say 6 hours, and then after 6 hours, they have to knock out another area and then get that one on. So the talks are just too much, and we decided to come with you and so that we show you that this one was the one that was here to supplement the Bijilo substation, but unfortunately, it had some problems and we have to wait. At the moment, the contractor is in India, They already given the specifications. The transformer has already been made, and they did the testing. Next week, according to plans, they're going to start transporting that transformer to the Gambia.
The wide awake viewers will be thinking, hang on, he was talking about water there, and this guy was talking about electricity, and I'll tell you why I got confused. After that, we asked them about certain areas, because NAWEC also have responsibility for water, and they also spoke about some of the water problems, which is why in my old age I tend to get confused, and that was one instance. Mr. Mboj, frequent power cuts, and just for the viewers' information, where I live on Coastal Road, it's not in the bush, trust me, if you know Gambia or Greater Banjul area. For a particular period of about close to 5 weeks, I think there were 3 days only when I went home and the lights were on. And we heard the talk is too much. We brought the journalists to show them the problems, is what we've heard. Is the talk still too much? Mr. Mboj?
Oh my God. Well, the talk is often proportionate to the degree, the severity of the problems we're going through. So, as I said, it reflects that. So take note. Sure. It's not just idle talk. Yeah, we're experiencing something. That's why we are talking about it. And they've given us the answer, as they usually say, the supply side problems, right. More demand and capacity.
There's a machine coming from India, it's been tested, and it's on its way, etc., etc. Yes. Of course, when it gets here, there'll probably be another question about, you know.
And towards the end of our report there, we said, well, at least the OMPG project by next month, once it kicks in, then perhaps half of our problems, or maybe more than that, we'll be all right.
This is it.
Okay. And next month.
Next month isn't far away. We're already close to halfway through this month, so it's a case of wait and see. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. I don't think we'll spend more time on this because it's a recurring problem, sadly. Now on to one which, when we proposed that we were going to do this, some of our colleagues in the office were like, you're going to do a story about what? And then they saw the story and they thought, oh, okay, so I won't keep you in suspense. It's about second-hand underwear. Yes, have a look.
When we buy panties, we have to wash it, we have to iron it, and then use it. The essence is to be very careful with these panties. The chances of infections are very evident. This is a used product, and you don't even know who is using it. You don't know the medical condition of the individual using it, the initial user. Sometimes we are so much in a rush that we don't want to wash these panties. What will happen is you will just put it on. Certain times you just iron it a little bit and put on the panties because you are so much worried that you will have a program to attend, or you have, because you have a new clothes, it thinks that is a new clothes, and you're so much eager to put it on. So it becomes, the chances are that, you know, you will have fungus. There could be molds and fungus on the panty.
The dangers of wearing second-hand panties without properly cleaning them. Mr. Mboj, I have to say, when the journalists, we bring our journalists around in the morning, I would say, okay, we go around all 8, 9, or 10, you know, however many are in that day, and say, I want you to come up with a human interest story. Sell it to me. They have to sell it to myself and Babacar Cissé. And when the young lady mentioned second-hand panties, I said, I beg your pardon? Did I mishear? She said, no, there's a huge trade in second-hand panties, and just shows you how rubbish us men are. Babacar and I were like, she's making this up. But then the ladies in the team were like, no, we see them out there being sold. But one of the things that really kind of touched home with us was that after it was shown, the number of people who got in touch and said, you know, we weren't aware of the dangers particularly. Mr. Mboj, I mean, were you as surprised as we were, or were you, you know, quite au fait with the fact that we see all types of second-hand clothing generally, but the panties one was a bit of a surprise for us men in the team.
No, I was surprised, but pleasantly so.
Yeah.
I felt that it was an angle that so many people wouldn't have focused on, and it's quite interesting socially.
Yes,
there's useful information, because we all know that with the second-hand clothing business, as it were, is thriving.
It's thriving
in this country.
It's huge.
So including the pants, the knickers, of course, for people who want to buy it. Yeah, so it is important for people to know this. Maybe a lot of experiences. Some women have had experiences, but they couldn't explain it.
Exactly, but
now
they might
with this, they might
think,
understand.
Because that was the kind of calls that we were getting. People saying, "Oh, maybe that's why." So it touched in a way that I had completely not. It's completely unforeseen as far as we were concerned.
And I had sort of also assumed that people who bought these things would obviously wash them before using them. I think that would just be automatic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So a bit surprised there
Sure.
that maybe not many people, not all, have been doing that sort of thing. So.
But as I said, it turned out to be educational for us and obviously for members of the audience who got in touch. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our 8th story. The GPA have recently handed over Arch 22. I bet you didn't know that it was in the control of the GPA either. Have a look at this.
Our mandate does not include keeping historical monuments, historical facilities, or facilities that can be served for arts and culture. The management decided to transfer these services to the NCAC because it is better placed with arts and culture.
And just to be clear, the bit that's been handed over is the pavilion. It's not the whole arch. But even though it's the pavilion, Mr. Mboj, why on earth was the pavilion ever in control of Gambia Ports Authority?
I think because they built it, didn't they? In 2014.
Right.
Yes, they built it for celebrations and national events and that sort of thing. So that's why they're giving it to the NCAC. Maybe they should just give the whole thing to the NCAC.
Well, indeed, yes.
Of course, recently, there was talk of the Arch 22 being renamed.
That's right.
In
yes.
honor of the victims of Jammeh, with the TRRC. Maybe that's what they want.
Sure.
I think that would be so fitting, because this arch was built, as it were. It's a triumphalist.
It is a triumphalist one, very much so.
But we all know that thing was a disaster.
You're quite.
Yeah, it has
wasn't.
been
They claimed at the time it was inauguration that it was commemorating and celebrating the revolution, as they called it. It wasn't any kind of revolution, except in the worst kind of
I know.
way.
The revolutionary arch.
Yeah.
Why don't you turn it to a kind of the reconciliatory arch, the arch of reconciliation, for instance. So something like that.
Indeed.
But let's move it away from its roots, because we knew that was just an awful.
It really was, and I think there will be this. I think the pressure to rename it will build, and I think it's an inevitability that it will be renamed. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key. So in the meantime, now the NCAC, they've got the pavilion.
Sure.
So we'll see what they will use it for.
Sure. And so if you want to hire it, don't contact the Ports Authority, contact the NCAC. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now, our magistrates have been going through some training recently, and this time it was on sentencing guidelines. Have a look.
Judiciary as being incredibly important to consolidating the democratic gains that the Gambia has made in recent years, and we heard more about that on Sunday morning. Because a free, fair, functioning judiciary is a cornerstone to any democracy, and that's why we regard it as being so important. And we saw just in recent elections just how important the judiciary were, and the fact that all participants to the elections had faith in the judiciary, and I think that's testament to the work that you all do.
The British High Commissioner there, this is the kind of impish side of me, leaving in that bit about him saying that all sides had faith in the the courts and in terms of the elections. I think some are still disputing. But this was a 2-day thing on sentencing guidelines, and it was just about updating them. And of course, for some of the newer magistrates, it was just orientating them to say, you know, this is what you do and this is how you follow the guidelines, because they have quite an important role to play in our sentencing
big time structure. Exactly, and how they put it is a refresher course.
Yes, indeed.
So they know, they know their work, but it's just that once in a while, periodically, you need to refresh, and of course you must do that, isn't it? A lot of cases will come before them, so the guidelines will help. You know, and hopefully they will create the flexibility, isn't it, in these cases, depending on how serious the offense is, yes. That sort of thing, and the range.
That's right.
And if you plead guilty, then what happens?
Yes.
Then the time you spend in remand, as it were. So, absolutely. Because it matters, for the sake of justice, yes. it matters. The notion of proportionality, you know, yes. The crime I commit and the punishment I get.
This is it. And for people watching, they might thinking, well, you know, if you commit a crime, but these things change over time. If we go back to Dickensian times, you know, Dickens was able to write about a debtor's prison. Now people think, oh, what? Well, in the old days in England, if you owed somebody money, you ended up in jail. And then eventually they thought, hang on, this is a bit stupid. If he's in jail, how is he going to pay me back? So they stopped sentencing people to prison for owing debts. They said, come out and work and pay off the debt to the person. So these things change over time, and yet when they were trying to change the law, there was great opposition to it. People said, no, let them rot in jail. And they thought, well, this is rather harsh. And also for certain, you know, to see how the law changes and so on, you know, certain people, if you were, you know, you had debts, for example, up to within the last 15 or 20 years only, if you're a doctor or a lawyer in England, you'd be struck off just for the fact that you, and then they thought, hang on, everybody has debts. Why shouldn't doctors or lawyers? And so they changed. And so in the courts themselves, you know, society changes. And so some of the sentencing that we inherited from colonizers are no longer appropriate now. And you know, it's more about rehabilitation, et cetera, et cetera. So a really good thing to have a refresher course.
Obviously, because we're evolving all the time.
Sure.
Just as we're bringing in new technology, we're bringing in also new ideas.
Indeed.
For me, ideas are a kind of technology,
sure.
As it were. So naturally, one must keep up with the new ideas of doing things. This is how you refresh your culture, your society, not just in the law, everywhere else. How you can incorporate the conventional, your inheritance, and the new thing coming. There's always going to be
you know, in England, I felt quite privileged to have worked in a government department's legal section, because I saw some of the law changes, including the first time that a court said, we will accept an email from somebody who has been accused responding to the charge. Before, it had to be a letter written, you know, and delivered, etc., in an envelope with a stamp, you know, registered letter. All that nonsense was thrown out and said, no, just email, because everybody's using email. And so, you know, the law changes as it must.
You have to incorporate these things into your culture. It's very curious. I like saying this. You know, when we were younger, in our maths or arithmetic classes, we were not allowed to use the calculator.
Sure.
Then I went to Britain, 14.
Sure.
In our maths exams, a teacher brought in the calculator.
Right.
So the culture shock there, that was quite extraordinary.
Quite.
So as a grown-up now, when I hear people say that we should incorporate technology into our education, I said, oh, I wish we had been thinking like that back then. Because we ended up, a lot of people with most of the features in the calculator, they don't know how to use it.
Quite.
So at least we caught on what it actually means to incorporate technology into, as it were, your educational system, how you teach people and how you do things, as it were. Quite extraordinary.
And what is even more extraordinary, I'll tell you this: when I was in primary schools, there were no calculators. I'm not kidding. We had to use an abacus, and of course they're too big to be carrying around. And if you don't know what an abacus is, look it up online. Mr. Mboj, thank you for that. And now on to our final story. The AFCON, Africa Cup of Nations, has concluded, and of course, for those of you who've been wide awake, of course, Senegal were the victors, but also Gambia did a very creditable run through to the quarterfinals. And Gambia's captain, Pa Modou Diagne, decided that it was time to hang up his international boots. We had him in the studio. Have a look.
So for me, I feel that, it's time for me, to leave, and support them, behind, but yeah, now I'm here. It was great for me. It was great, and I think it's the best decision I made,
Diagne hung up his boots for active international football duties, but says he will still continue playing for his Swiss club side, Daitikon. Despite his retirement, Pa Modou says he can give back to the national team in many ways.
I think I can give a lot.
There you have Pa Modou Diagne there saying that, he can give back a lot. And for me, Mr. Mboj, we were discussing this, and I, some of my colleagues couldn't understand, and I think you and I know that it's best to go out on a high. And I gave the example of us saying it's best to go where people are saying, oh, I wish he would stay, rather than, oh, I wish he would go. And he's chosen the perfect time. I mean, their run to the quarters lifted our spirits.
Absolutely. The best time to bow out is when you are on top.
Indeed.
I mean, you know that after that, the only way is down. I mean, it's just the logic of the situation.
Of course, yeah.
And it's been successful.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
And he's written himself in many ways into the history books.
Sure.
Can you imagine 20 years from now, and you just have buddies, they're having a kind of sports quiz.
Right.
Okay, when Gambia first went to the AFCON 21, who was the captain?
Right.
20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now.
He'll be there. He's in the history books.
He's in the history books. So this is forever.
Indeed, indeed.
This is really the first. Yeah. Often the first will always stand out.
Sure.
So forever, Pa Modou Diagne is in the history books.
This is it. And our colleagues or neighbors in Senegal, of course, they won the trophy. Penalties it went to, and the debate carried on. Mo Salah got standing, waiting, and Sadio Mane, meanwhile, took the deciding one, and everybody was saying, well, why didn't Mo Salah go earlier? You can always have these debates in football, but I mean, for the Gambia one, first ever AFCON, and really beyond our wildest expectations that they got through to the quarters, and of course, most pleasingly for me, we got there and Mali didn't.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, that was icing on the cake, as we said the other day.
Yeah.
So absolutely fantastic. That was why, I kept banging on about the Senegambian AFCON 2021. It's really, one can call it the Senegambian AFCON in many ways.
Very well so.
Because Senegal's win in many ways was our win as well.
Sure.
Because at least where I was, around Kololi area, you had a lot of cars, honking.
And even in the office here, outside, we could hear
that. But also, as you were telling me, a lot of Gambians came over and said, no, they didn't want Senegal to win.
And that was the thing that surprised me, that several of them, and not just one or two, said, oh, I was supporting Egypt. It took me aback, I have to say. I thought, what? They said, yeah, I was supporting Egypt. I wanted Egypt to win. And then they started telling me about how horrible Senegalese are. I said, but I also hear you guys talk about how we're brothers and we're the same. And yet you're telling me you'd rather Egypt had won? It really did surprise me.
Sibling rivalry,
yeah,
or sometimes people will say, when you say we're brothers, somebody once said, just like Cain and Abel, we're brothers. So that aspect of it is also there, as it were. I remember when we were younger in Banjul, we had this curious relationship with Senegalese.
Right.
We thought that they were sort of loudmouth,
right.
and always they think that they're smarter than you are, and that sort of thing, try to outsmart you sort of in commercial dealings and that sort of thing. So we had this love-hate relationship in many ways, as you normally
Sure.
see between neighbors.
Well, indeed,
sort of.
it
It's a,
happens.
you know, it's a bit like a Liverpool-Everton kind of thing.
absolutely.
Sometimes, you know, you can have
Noisy
that.
neighbours, Man United,
Noisy
Man
neighbours,
City.
Man United, Man City.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that in the end,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
you're not family. It's just
still
like
family.
sometimes, you know, you do get this sibling stuff, but in the end,
Yeah.
you are family. When the chips are down,
This is it.
you tend to come together.
Yes, I used to fight my older brother, but if anybody tried to fight him,
that's it.
You'd have me to deal with.
Yes.
A good point to end on, Mr. Mbuj. Thank you for your interventions. And to the viewers, I always say thank you for watching. As always, we're always glad to come here and bring you stories. And you've been watching the Week in Review. And until the next time, goodbye.